Yes boys, welcome back to the channel. It's Birdfood and I've taken my next build into the DLC and it's the one and only Bloody Mage. I've leveled this build up to level 167, we've got 60 Vigour, 60 Dex, 26 Faith and 27 Arcane. We're using the Rexasha's Great Katana, we're using the Claws of Night and then we're also using the Flowerstone Gavel in our left hand weapon slot. I've got both of the Canvas Talismans equipped to boost our incantations as well as the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, but I may switch these up in the future. And then in our flask we've got the Opaline Hard tier as well as the Green Burst Crystal tier. So this build was in desperate need of a bit of a revamp, so I've took it into the DLC and give it some new weapons and give it a makeover, and it's looking a lot better than it was previously. I'm going to be making use of some of these new weapons which really fit the build of being a freaky, scary type build with these horrible bleed weapons, and then we're using all of the original bleed spells from the base game to add to that blood build up against our enemies. That's the build guys, let's take the new and improved Bloody Mage into the video for some invasions and let's cause some havoc. So if you've been following my channel for any length of time guys, you'll know that Bloody Mage has been one of my original builds that I've had for a long time. It was one of the first builds I made. I think it was maybe like the 6th or 7th build that I made. You know, not one of the first, but when you've got 48 builds, I'd class the 6th or 7th build as being one of the first builds. But yeah, I've had it for a long time, and it was always the ultimate Blood Mage build. I was using the original bleed incantations, all of the ones that I'm using on the build now. But as well as these, I used to have the spells as well, the Briars of Sin and the Briars of Punishment. So as well as the seal, I was also using a staff, switching between the two for when the situation either called for an incantation or a spell. As well as the incantations and the spells that I had on the build, I also had an array of weapons ranging from curved swords. I had a straight sword on there. I dabbled with a scythe, although I've never really been too keen on the scythes in this game. I just can't get on with the move set. I can never really make them work for me. I find them a bit weird, but I did try the scythe. And I was also using at one point the Celebrant's Blood Skull, the hammer, which I did actually really like. It suited the build visually, and I love hammers, and it was one of my favourite weapons on this build actually. I may even bring that weapon back onto this build, just because I really liked it. But all the weapons on the build were bleed infused, and the stats were a little bit different as well. The stats on this now is high dex with a bit of arcane, but previous to this the stats were high arcane with minimum dex and strength, so I was going for that all out bleed build up on my enemies. I was just trying to be a bit of a blood machine with this build. Now for the first year or so of this build's life cycle, it was actually really effective. It was a really fun build, everything was going fine. I was getting some good invasions, I was doing some good work, but as the game progressed, everyone caught on a little bit more to you know, play styles and weapons that were really strong, and everyone started wearing heavier armour with more poise. This build just started to struggle a little bit. I was at about level 80 previous to this, that I've leveled it up to 167 now. Previous to this it was at about level 80 or 90 I think. The stats were a little bit spread out, and I also had very low defences and low poise, which when you was using some of the spells that I was using on this build, the Briars of Sin, the Briars of Punishment, some of the incantations that I'm using here still, they're not very strong in terms of hyper armour, they're not very strong in terms of massive big burst damage. The Briars of Sins can be if you play it right, but the problem was that everything was very easily interrupted. Like I said, I didn't have much poise on the build. I'd try and make things work, but I'd just get rushed down. I didn't have the defences to battle through any big attacks from my enemies, and everyone just started catching on a little bit, and this build became really difficult to use. Invasions were turning into a little bit of a slog. It was very hard to make things work, even with my bleed infused weapons, mixing all those things into the spells, the incantations. You know, sometimes I'd have decent invasions, but most of the time it was just hard. It was a hard build to get going. Like I say, you know, first year I saw that I was using this build, it was going really well, but then as the game progressed, it just got more difficult as everyone else developed their own builds, you know, got more armour, blah de blah de blah, started spamming weapons, magic. It was all becoming a little bit difficult. So the last time I actually used this build, I actually declared that this was Bloody Mary's swan song, and we probably wouldn't see Bloody Mary again. I was actually thinking I was going to have to strip this build right down, change it entirely, level it up to a higher level, which at the time I didn't want to do. I was thinking I'm going to just respec it, use the build that as it is, you know, respec it and turn it into a completely different build altogether. I thought Bloody Mary had had a day and it was time to change and just use that character slot for something new. But the DLC came out, guys, and it started giving me some ideas. My brain started ticking. I started seeing some of these new weapons that were became available. I started seeing some of the new incantations, and my little clogs up in my brain started turning. All the dust started to drift away. All the cobwebs that are up in my brain started to you know, fall away, and I started to get some ideas for Bloody Mary. And I knew that with the DLC, this was her chance to come back stronger than ever. So the first thing that I knew that I needed to do with this build was to level it up. So, you know, I think you could go through the DLC at level 80 or 90. I think it would be doable, especially with the Erdtree blessings and all that. You know, level isn't as important, but I think if you're going down to a low level, I do think you would struggle in the DLC with, say, a level 30, level 40 build, but I think it would be possible at level 80 or 90. But I didn't want to do that. You know, I knew that with the DLC. I think higher levels at the moment, at least, are where it's at, because you're going to get the most activity, because everyone's playing through it at higher levels right now. So I wanted to take this build up. My two previous builds that I've done the DLC with, I've took up to level 200, so I didn't want to take this build to level 200. I wanted to try a little bit lower on this one, see how we get on. I thought I'd try it a little bit lower and see if the fog walls are any less. The fog wall invasions have been a bit of a problem at level 200, so I thought if I try level 167, maybe the fog walls won't be as bad at this level. And also just compare the activity at 167 to 200. So I leveled it up to 167. I did actually mule the weapons onto this build from one of my other builds that I've done the DLC with. I gave this build the weapons that I wanted it to use. I went through the base game because I hadn't unlocked everything at the base game at level 80 or 90. I took some time and went and did the mountain tops. I went and did Crumbling Farah Missoula. I did the Erdtree. I basically completed the base game with this build, got everything unlocked. Then I progressed to the DLC, and I've kind of just done the first area. You know, I've done the Gravesite Plains, I've got to the first Legacy Dungeon, and I've not progressed much further than there. And then I started doing some invasions. So I gave it the weapons that I wanted it to have. I respec'd it. I increased the dex, lowered the arcane, pretty much made it a dex build to suit the weapons that I'm using. And then yeah, I started doing my first round of invasions with the new and improved Bloody Mary. I gave her some new fashion, kept the headpiece. Obviously the headpiece is absolutely vital to this build. It's a whole identity. She's Bloody Mary, she's the Blood Witch. She's the lady that haunts all of our dreams. So she had to keep the headpiece that she's wearing. It's absolutely vital to the build. It's a whole identity, is that horrible mask staring out at you. But she got the new chest piece. It's the braided cord robe. It's Horn Scent's chest piece. I think it looks absolutely awesome and really suits the mask that we're wearing. And as well as this, I give her some new leggings and some new gauntlets, so she's a little bit more tanky. So I gave her the weapons, gave her the fashion, leveled up to suit everything that I wanted to use, and then we was up and running. I actually decided to remove the Briars of Sin and Briars of Punishment from this build, and I decided just to focus on the incantations. Going into the DLC, I did actually have plans for this build to include some intelligence, and I actually planned to use the vanishing spell, the one which is like a teleport. What's it called? Oh, what's it called? I can't remember. Can't remember what it's called, but it's like Bloodhound Step for mages, isn't it? But my plan was to use the Staff of the Great Beyond, use that spell, use maybe one or two spells on this build as well as the vanishing spell, and mix it in a little bit, spells and incantations like I had done previously. But as I started looking at the stats, I've got quite high dex, quite high vigour. I put some arcane on this build, which I'll explain why shortly. But I realised that to include the intelligence that I wanted as well, I'd probably have to take this build up to level 200. And then, like I say, I didn't want to take it up to 200. I wanted it to stick at 167, and I decided just to have it more of a focused build on the incantation side of things. So I got rid of the Brides of Sin, got rid of the Brides of Punishment. I ditched my plans to use any future spells on this build, and I've decided just to focus on the incantations. So why have I got 27 arcane on this build? Because, I'm using the Flowerstone Gavel in our left hand, mixing between the Gavel and the Seal depending on the situation. The Gavel, by the way, that hammer in our left hand, is really cool. I love the Ash of War in it, long range lightning strike. Again, I think it really suits the build, and it's good for utility, catching people off when they're at low health, finishing them off with that lightning strike. It's a really handy weapon to have on the build. Unlucky in this invasion there, by the way. The summon just got us with a backstab. That was such a good war against those two. Unlucky. We lost, but it was a good invasion. So yeah, we've got 27 arcane on the build. Now you might be saying, we don't need that arcane. Why is that arcane? The Flowerstone Gavel only needs 15 arcane to use. So why have I got 27? Well, the 27 arcane is in preparation to use an incantation that I want to use once I've progressed the DLC, and that is the Furious Blade of Ansbach. It's that really cool looking incantation. It's got that blood flame effect, which would really suit the build, as we do have some other blood flame effects going on with our incantations now, and it needs 27 arcane. So I knew that I definitely wanted to include that on the build. So when I was leveling this build up, getting it prepared for the DLC, getting it prepared for all the new kit that I wanted to use, I made sure to have 27 arcane so I can use that incantation when it comes to the point where I can get it. But like I say, I mentioned earlier, I've only progressed the initial part of the DLC currently, so I'm nowhere near actually being able to get it, but the build is ready for it once I get there. There is also one or two other incantations that I want to include on this build as I progress. I think the weapons, I'm quite set with the weapons now. I'm quite happy with the weapons that I'm using, but the incantations may get added to as we go along. But as I said, the Furious Blade of Ansbach is definitely going to be one of them. I don't know if it's very good in PvP. I'm not sure. I've not really seen anyone using it, but I think it's going to suit the build either way. And I'm going to use it, and I'm going to try and see what I can do, but yeah, that's going to be added to the build, which explains why we've got the 27 arcane. Bit of a strange stat requirement for that spell. 19 faith, 27 arcane, but it is what it is. I just think it's going to look visually really good, so I knew that I wanted to add it, so I'm prepared and I'm ready to get it when the time comes. Just a little word on the Rakshasa's Great Katana. I absolutely love this thing. I think the Great Katanas in general have been such a good addition to the build. It's increased, obviously, we've had a few additions to the weapon pool, but I think the Great Katana is probably the best one. It's definitely my favourite anyway. I have used the Dragon Great Katana on another build previously, but I always knew that I wanted to use this katana on the Bloody Mary build once I give her that makeover. Once I took her into the DLC, I was having, I was planning in my head to use this weapon on the build. Now I did try the normal Great Katana as well, and I was trying to infuse it with Blood Flame Blade. So I keen infused it, I got it scaling with Dex, because I've got the Dex on this build, and then I was trying it with the Blood Flame Blade, and I think I had Bloody Slash on it. And it's okay, but I think damage wise the Rakshasa just completely outclasses it in terms of damage returns. And as well, I'm pretty sure I've heard people say this, and it actually feels this way when you're using the katana. I think it comes with a bit of innate hyper armor compared to the base Great Katana, just a standard Great Katana. I'm pretty sure it feels different. I'm pretty sure you feel like you have a little more poise when you're using it, especially on like the Ash of War and stuff. It just feels a little bit more solid in terms of an overall weapon. So I did try the standard Great Katana with Bloody Slash, but I pretty much succumbed to just like using this as my main weapon. Obviously we've got the other backup weapons on the build. We've got the Flowerstone Gavel, and then in our left hand weapon slot we've got the Claws of Night, just for utility, just for extra added damage on the build. And overall, with all the weapons that we're using, I think it all adds to the theme of the build, and it creates a really potent build that isn't mega overpowered compared to some of the builds we'll be playing against in the DLC when we're invading. It definitely doesn't feel like it's some horrible bleed machine. It doesn't feel like I'm just going in winning every invasion. I definitely have to work at it, but yeah, feels like a good build overall. But this is the last invasion of the video, guys. We took out that horse nice and easy in the Erdtree there with the Ash of War. Speaking of the Rakshas's great katana there, we just sliced him up. But yeah, that was the last one, guys. Thanks for watching. Keep your eyes open on the channel. There's going to be more bloody Murray videos coming very soon. But in the meantime, look after yourselves, and I'll see you all on the next one.